Okay, we're good. All right, hello everyone. Welcome to our Diversity in Water speaker series. Just a few housekeeping items. Please keep your microphones muted during the Simoni's presentation. Feel free though to introduce yourself and tell us your name and where you work or where you study in the chat, and just say hello and not work. As you think of them, please ask any questions in the chat box. We're going to gather them and have a Q&A session with Simoni at the end. And just to let you know, we will be recording this session and it'll be made available on the Diversity in Water series YouTube. And then just really quick, I'm going to highlight some of the organizations that are involved. So I'm just going to very briefly go over them because I'm sure you guys we've talked about these two organizations during each series. So the Diversity Committee of the American Water Works Association is really about promoting diversity in the water industry. We partner with them with putting the series on and just collaborate with promoting events, and it's just like a really great networking group to network with. The other one, if you're a young professional, the Young Professionals Committee is very active in Ohio, and there's also all sorts of positions that if you're interested in getting a kind of a foot in the door with the American Water Works Association or just meeting new people, really great group of people to interact with. All right. And with that, I am honored to introduce Simoni Triantafyllidou. Simoni is an environmental engineer with USEPA's Office of Research and Development in Cincinnati, Ohio. She conducts research and provides technical support revolving around aquatic chemistry, drinking water quality and treatment, corrosion science, inorganic contaminants, and sustainable drinking water infrastructure, which is like premise plumbing and distribution systems. Simoni earned her Ph.D. and MS in environmental engineering at Virginia Tech after completing her undergraduate engineering degree at the Technical University of Crete in Greece. Simoni currently serves as an AWWA Water Quality and Technology Division Trustee after previously chairing the AWWA Premise Plumbing Committee. Welcome, Simoni, and thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much, everybody. Hi, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to give a talk that's a little bit broader than just the technical aspects, I guess, of what I do. And before I start, I just wanted to really thank the two committees that kind of sponsor and organize this series, the Young Professionals and the Diversity and Inclusion Committees of the AWWA Ohio section, because as I was telling Megan earlier, in all the talks I've given, all the invitations I've received, I've never had such kind of clear instructions and periodic check-ins in such an organized way to get prepared for this webinar. So I'm really grateful. So with that, Megan did a great job introducing me and pronouncing my name. But through the years, folks generally tend to ask because I have an accent and because I have a very long last name. So I figured I would title my talk as Accent with an Accent. And I figured to kind of focus on my research path in the drinking water industry. You've probably seen a lot of other talks covering all sorts of aspects of our industry. So mine is primarily a research path and hopefully useful to everyone. So with that, with the accent and the name, maybe you already figured out that I wasn't actually born in the United States. I was born and raised in Greece, a small country in the Mediterranean Sea. And I'm actually from the north of Greece. So on the map on the left, you can see the kind of red bubble on the top. This is where I lived when I was in Greece before I went to do my undergraduate at the Technical University of Crete. So that's all the way to the south of the country, that little other red dot that you can see on the island of Crete. So for many people, when they think of Greece, they probably think of kind of the archaeological monuments, the Parthenon and all the other temples in the Acropolis Hill in the capital city, Athens. Folks might also be familiar with perhaps, the creation of ancient Greek comedy or tragedy. Most folks will definitely be familiar with touristic sites, beautiful islands, and sandy beaches. And this is all, really great. But mainland Greece is also amazingly beautiful. This is actually a picture of my village in the north of Greece. You can see it's very green, nothing like the islands, but still pretty amazing, very peaceful place, and actually one of my favorite places to visit when I go back. So, my view of the world was kind of limited as I was growing up, even going from the north of Greece to the south to pursue my engineering degree kind of felt like a huge step. So I was fortunate to earn my bachelor's in environmental engineering at the Technical University of Crete. And after that little initial step within the borders of a country then allowed a much bigger step across the Atlantic to come to the United States to pursue what I thought would be a short kind of stay just for a master's degree in environmental engineering at Virginia Tech. And after that came the Ph.D., and after that came a postdoctoral fellowship at the USEPA through a mechanism, a vehicle called the Oak Ridge Institute for Science and Education. So that was in Cincinnati, Ohio, which then led to a permanent position at the EPA, at the Office of Research and Development, where I still am. So, we're all interested in water, and we're in the water industry in some capacity. For me, growing up, and really as with all major kind of civilizations throughout human history, there has been an extremely big focus on water because civilizations and humans realize the importance and the necessity to life and prosperity. So one of the many Greek philosophers at one point had said that water is the arche, the principle of all things. And I was very lucky when I was an undergraduate student in Crete to visit the Minoan Palace in Knossos, Crete. That was a different city from the city I was studying at. But as a tourist, along with all the others, and among many other beautiful things, beautiful murals and kind of architectural styles and things that you could observe, were these amazing terracotta pipes, really kind of, signs of those first water supply and water treatment systems by the Minoan civilization in prehistoric times. So starting at about 3,200 BC, a very long time ago, is when people really understood the importance of conveying water and treating it, filtering it for consumption. After the Greeks came the Romans. With them came a lot of lead pipes. Those were widely used in domestic water lines. And although we're trying to kind of get rid of the legacy of lead pipes in drinking water systems in the United States, linguistically, at least, we'll keep having the legacy, right? Even the word we use, plumbing, every day really is derived from the Latin plumbum, which means lead. This really shaped my research career in water. But before that, I'll start out a little bit more at the beginning. This is a beautiful aerial image of the Technical University of Crete. As you can kind of tell, it's generally small university. And it was also a very young university. It was my first choice to study there. I was very lucky to have passed the entrance exams for that, as all kind of Greek students had to. And one of the most amazing things for me were that my professors they had experiences from other countries. So some of them, had earned their PhDs in Europe, or they had teaching experience there. Some of them came from North America, from the United States or Canada. And they really brought with them kind of a more informal approach to teaching. They had open door policies. You could talk to them a little bit more easily. They had group projects in classes, which were a lot of fun, not just kind of the standard, just reading textbooks and then going and sitting tests to pass classes. So I was really kind of inspired by the attitude and the freshness they brought relative to some kind of more established historical universities in Greece. And I kind of really wanted to go where these people had been, because I really liked the vibe that they were bringing to the university. Having said that, still as an undergraduate student at the Technical University of Crete, I was mostly just, taking classes, many classes, a lot of engineering core courses that were required, some other electives, but I didn't really have the opportunity to work in labs as much or conduct research, which I was really interested in. So that's where Virginia Tech kind of came to be. That really allowed me the opportunity to explore the lab and to have all sorts of different kind of research activities. So as a graduate student at Virginia Tech, starting with the master's initially and then moving on to the PhD, I was able to learn about benchtop, so bench scale studies. I was able to learn about pilot studies. I was really fortunate to conduct field investigations, which was extremely eye-opening and perhaps out of everything, kind of the most instrumental and humbling in kind of understanding the issues on the ground. And I also had the opportunity to do some desktop work, some blood lead modeling, for example, using an EPA blood lead model at the time. So all of that really revolved around lead in tap water in my case, because when I was starting my research, the Washington, D.C. lead in water crisis had been publicized through the Washington Post. So it really motivated myself and other members of my research group to really focus in that area. So these are activities that have to do with being a research assistant at the graduate level, but I also had the opportunity to be a teaching assistant. So I was grading a course at one point, and then when I was a PhD student, I had the opportunity to teach the course myself, so full teaching responsibility of a junior engineering class, which was very eye-opening. On the left here, you can see a picture of what the class actually looked like, and on the right was the book I was teaching. The class was called Introduction to Environmental Engineering. And it was mandatory, so a lot of students from different disciplines, some of them were engineers and some of them were not, had to take it. And it was very broad and actually quite challenging. So when I was preparing for this presentation, I actually went back to the evaluations I had received as an instructor for that class. I thought it might be fun to kind of remind myself what the students had said about me. And I realized, I kind of was reminded of the fact that, when you're teaching different people that have different ways of learning, some things that you're doing will resonate with some of them. So there was this one review that, Simoni, was a good teacher. But there was also, so that's kind of the smiley face, the smiley theater mask from ancient Greece. But, there were other students for whom my approach didn't necessarily work. And of course, there was kind of a third category of students who just genuinely didn't particularly care about the subject matter and were very honest about it, which I personally really appreciate. So with that, those were kind of the challenges of teaching, but also the things, you learn from teaching. With that also came kind of some cultural challenges for an international student like myself. And if there are folks in the audience who, might also come from a different country or who had to move within the United States for your degrees or for your jobs, perhaps some of that might be your experience. And I would love to hear more about that. But this schematic here, this roller coaster kind of reflects mine. I didn't create this. It's from the excitededucator.com website of another student, but really captures kind of my experience really well. And every experience is different, so I don't mean to imply that other folks might feel the same way, but for me, this really captures it. So if emotions are on the y-axis, and of course we like our graphs, and on the x-axis is time, when I was coming to the United States from Greece in the airplane from Athens International Airport, I was just so excited about everything. This was this new world of opportunities kind of opening up in front of me where I would, experience research and experience a different culture and a different language and, different foods and different adventures. So I was really on a high in the beginning, which is actually pretty typical. But then, with time, you kind of realize some of your limitations, right? Maybe my language skills were not exactly, fully developed at the time. So I remember I attended my first class at Virginia Tech. I was sitting at the very back of the class, and I couldn't really understand what the instructor was saying. By the end of the class, I really thought to myself that, oh my gosh, I'm not sure I can pass this class. I'm not sure I understand, the English to be able to pull this off. So I kind of became a little bit disappointed. But, with time, I improved. I became more experienced. So I was able to kind of recover from that low. I started getting excited again, but there would come then the occasional trip back to Greece, where then, when it's time to come back, you start kind of missing your home country a little bit. And by the end of this, and that's certainly the case with me, when enough time had passed, when it was, time to visit Greece, that actually felt like a reverse culture shock. And I was actually excited to return back to my new world from Greece. So that really captures it well for me, but I would love to hear experiences of others. This was kind of the cultural roller coaster, but there was also kind of the research roller coaster. So it's kind of a very noble thing to pursue a PhD, and even the name, Doctor of Philosophy, just sounds, I don't know, so noble. The love of wisdom, right? The ability to pursue more wisdom in a specific topic and become a specialist in that topic. But research does come with challenges, and we don't often talk about those. I could discuss perhaps some of the successes that I've had, but I just want to talk about this roller coaster instead. Some of the things I realized, first of all, the classroom was very different in the real world. So I remember, at Virginia Tech, I took so many statistics classes that you can't believe it. In my own department, the civil and environmental engineering department, but also in other departments, I felt so well equipped with all the possible tools, I might need to really be able to conduct, proper statistical analyses. And then as part of my PhD, I had these different real world data sets to evaluate. One of them was a data set of blood lead data from non-modeling from a big hospital in Washington, D.C. And we also had drinking water lead data. And, in order to figure out if there was an association before and after kind of the spike in water lead levels. And I just realized that all the tools that I had learned about didn't really apply, because a lot of the assumptions for the statistical tests just didn't apply for real world data sets, which was kind of a big revelation for me. Then in general, for experiments, I don't want to say failure necessarily, although that's the word I wrote here, but a lot of research doesn't turn out the way we might originally have hoped or expected. Sometimes results are just not that interesting. They might not be statistically significant. So in my experience, definitely with the master's research, when I was first starting to get, my feet wet in the lab, the majority of the time I had less success than more. And only toward the end of the master's did I really catch a break with experiments, and I was able to write my master's thesis and successfully graduate. So with all of these issues, for me, definitely came burnout, especially considering that lab work, if it's like, in-person work in the lab, if it's not remote kind of modeling work or other types of research where maybe there's more flexibility in location and timing. But, when drinking water needed to be sampled, there were no weekends or evenings, and that kind of affects your schedule and your balance in life. So were all kind of challenges to kind of navigate. So it really took a lot of different groups to offer support, and I'm extremely grateful to all of them. They really got me through kind of the hard times and allowed me to really kind of prosper at Virginia Tech. One of them was the International Center, the Cornwall International Center at Virginia Tech. It basically hosted activities for international students like myself, and it allowed us opportunities to engage and socialize before we were able to develop our own kind of separate social networks and professional networks. So very grateful to them. But I was also part of a big research team in my own department, in my own research group at Virginia Tech. And that was an extremely supportive group as well. Here is just the makeup of the group at one point in time. Of course, with graduate research groups, students come and go all the time. Some of them, defend and graduate and new ones come, and the same with visiting scholars or other researchers. So there are a lot of other folks not shown in the picture. But it was really a very diverse group, having anything from undergraduate student helpers in experiments to master's students like myself, PhD students like, I eventually was, postdoctoral researchers, research scientists, visiting scholars, of course, my academic advisor, but also other collaborating professors and mentors. So just a really supportive environment, a lot of group projects, which just made some of the harder times more fun. And on top of that, there was also the graduate school at Virginia Tech. So that was just a place for all graduate students to meet and get together, regardless of their nationality, regardless of their discipline, which department they were in, whether they were doing a master's degree or a PhD. But it was really another group and another place where you could feel really that you belonged. So with all of this support, in the end, the master's and the PhD ended up being successful. Challenges were overcome. I was very fortunate to have my master's thesis be awarded an AWWA award and also an AESP award from the Association of Environmental Engineering and Science Professors. Was very fortunate for my PhD to also be awarded an AESP Best Dissertation Award. And really, by all measures, it was a very educational and kind of successful experience. But I had stayed in that place for quite a long time. I had now developed this networks and this kind of safety nets, and it was time to make another decision and to figure out where I would go next and, what I would do with the PhD. So I was actually applying to positions left and right. I was applying to academic positions in Europe and in the United States, and other kinds of positions also. And at the time, there was interest at the EPA to hire an ORISE fellow to conduct drinking water led research, which is what I had studied, with some of the most amazing researchers at the time that were really internationally renowned for being experts in their field, and Mike Schock was one of them. So when that opportunity came at the EPA, I just knew that I didn't want to lose that opportunity. Now, having been at the EPA for almost a decade at different capacities, I do like to kind of explain how it works, because it's a large organization, and this is really high level, not too detailed, but I think still useful for folks who maybe interact with EPA or even read the news about decisions the EPA makes. But this is basically the structure of the EPA. So at the heart of the organization is really the mission, which is to protect human health and the environment. This is by far the number one reason that I am at the agency, because I really personally believe in the mission. But I'm part of the Office of Research and Development at the top, or else ORD, which is the scientific foundation for the agency. As you can see here, there are other offices. So there are the program offices. Those are the ones that develop national policy and revise national policy. And we also have the regional offices, which are the primary interface with states. And those are the ones kind of responsible for policy implementation. So perhaps you can kind of tell from this schematic here that out of all the EPA offices, and of course we interact with each other, to accomplish that shared mission and that shared goal. But among all the different EPA offices, ORD is kind of the least directly, tied to regulations, let's say, to the development of regulations or implementation of regulations. Here is a map of ORD, EPA ORD facilities around the country with the red stars. So we have a bunch of locations. The big one is in Cincinnati, Ohio, across the University of Cincinnati. That's where I report back to the Center for Environmental Solutions and Emergency Response. And our smaller mission at our center level is really twofold: to conduct research and provide technical support. Research, is just applied and fundamental research, really mostly applied for the drinking water stuff that we do, more so than fundamental. And technical support is the ability to respond to requests for help if we have the resources. A lot of the time, the research component and the technical support component are really intertwined. When we learn about specific situations in different communities, as part of technical support efforts, we try to simulate those situations in the lab, perhaps try to identify what are the underlying mechanisms for these water quality problems, and try to solve them. So again, that applied research component is really tied to our technical support efforts. A bit more about ORD. The numbers might not be exactly right, but we have roughly 2,000 employees spread across these facilities that I showed you previously. And we have all these interesting kind of acronyms, under my office, the Office of Research and Development. We have different centers. After the centers, we have different divisions, and within divisions, we have different drinking water branches. On the right here, you see our main facility in Cincinnati, Ohio, where I was for almost 10 years before I moved to California for family reasons. And here is a very interesting kind of word cloud with my research activities. If you've heard of Google Scholar, this is a different website called Scholar Googler, which basically takes information from your Google Scholar account, if you have one. Mine kind of sums up all my journal papers and my kind of academic contributions. And it kind of checks how often, certain words are being used. So in my case, the most common words are water and lead, and those were encountered kind of with equal frequency in all of my papers. And then, of course, there's other words that pop up, like plumbing and systems and exposure, and things like that. I don't just work with lead, but it is really a main focus. So for this presentation, I'm just focusing on lead. Here you can see kind of a different view of my research activities and how they all kind of, relate back to lead. And because it's late in the day and I think everybody's tired, I decided I'm not going to go into too heavy on the research components, but maybe just provide you with a few kind of general examples of the type of research that I've done recently. So one aspect has been to look into how we quantify lead in drinking water. That has to do with sampling site selection, water sample collection, water sample preparation, and then quantification by an analytical detector. And remember, at ORD, we're not necessarily tied just to the regulatory framework. So, we're looking at lead quantification matters more broadly than just what the regulation for lead might require. We've looked into water sample collection. We realized that in order to answer the question, what constitutes a representative water sample, we need to understand what the goal of sampling is for lead quantification. And this is just an example of a recent paper that acknowledges the different kinds of variability that might exist in the lead content of a water sample, the different contributing factors that contribute to that variability. and then the understanding of different purposes to conduct sampling, which then might dictate which type of protocol, of sampling protocol, might better answer different types of questions. We've also looked at field analyzers for lead quantification, and very fortunate to have worked with the Greater Cincinnati Waterworks on a few projects on this. This is just an example of two portable devices that the Waterworks and ourselves at the EPA kind of looked into to understand how they compare to laboratory instruments for lead quantification. At EPA, I'm extremely fortunate to have the AMSARC lab kind of available to me. AMSARC stands for Advanced Materials and Solids Analysis Research Corps. Is actually the largest repository of excavated lead pipes from North America, from the United States and Canada. There's several hundreds of them. And our geologists and other scientists there really have developed techniques and have a wide range of instrumentation to analyze, to excavated pipes, to cut them open and evaluate the scale that has formed inside them, and really be able to relate what they see with water quality in those systems where those pipes have been excavated. This is just an example of one paper that the team wrote explaining the methodology to conduct pipe scale analysis. We've looked at other corrosion and release tools as part of the work for those that are kind of more closely tied to corrosion issues. You're probably familiar with stagnant coupon tests, pipe loops, and other kinds of things. So we kind of looked at all of those and what they might tell you. And more recently, I've had the opportunity to kind of look into lead service line identification a little bit closer as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law program that we have at ORD. So you might have realized already that teamwork is a big theme in my presentation, and that certainly has been the case at EPA Cincinnati also. This is just a summary of some of the people I've collaborated with through the years. Many of them have since moved on and are no longer at the EPA, but I'm grateful to all of them nonetheless. And since this webinar is organized by volunteers, as part of the AWWA Ohio chapter, I figured to mention some of my volunteer work as well. I've been I was chair of the Premise Plumbing Committee for 3 years. I actually co-chaired the committee alongside Alex Mofidi and Hélène Barbeau, and we had a bunch of other folks who were leading subcommittees. We had more than 120 members at one point, and we're just extremely fortunate to have really great collaboration to publish upflow articles, arrange special sessions at conferences, and really be very active in the committee world. So I really did want to touch on U.S. immigration a little bit for those who might be familiar, and for those who might not. Just to explain what the journey might look for someone, who might not originally be from this country. So when I started in 2004 for my master's, I was actually a student. So I had a student visa that's called an F1. Because I was in an engineering field, I had the opportunity to extend that visa afterwards. So to get what was called an F1 OPT STEM extension. But when I moved to the EPA, that type of visa was not allowed. So I switched to a different type of visa called the J1 Exchange Visitor Visa. After that visa, I realized, well, I've already had a few different types of visas and that needed to be renewed periodically. So I decided to hire a lawyer, earn a green card, which I did. So that's a permanent residency card. And 5 years after that, I had the ability to apply to become a US citizen, which for me happened in the year 2020. This is actually what you're seeing here is the evolution of the Hokie bird, so the Virginia Tech mascot, and how it changed aesthetically through the years, which, I learned to love that mascot. Initially, I was kind of curious about the idea of having an imaginary kind of turkey-looking bird as a mascot of the university. But now I've learned to love it, and yeah, this is my immigration evolution along with the evolution of the hockey bird. These are some photos from my naturalization ceremony in Amelia, Ohio. This was actually a drive-in cinema, and during COVID precautions, it was an outdoor ceremony with masks. It was a very meaningful kind of moment and event in my life. Perhaps not as meaningful though as me meeting my match, maybe equally as me meeting my match, my husband at the EPA. This I stole from one of my husband's presentations. He's actually a professor at a university. When he gave this, when he presented, his presentation and gave this slide, he explained, he introduced himself as an average exemplar of an average species, and that's because he looks into plants and trees. The species, of which to him are just more important than humans. But he also described himself as a curious nose picker, and he's definitely pretty curious and adventurous, and that's kind of different than myself. I was actually pretty introverted and shy. So we match each other well, I suppose. We supplement each other well. To kind of start wrapping it up, when I was a student in middle school, one of the many subjects I had to learn about was the Odyssey. This is actually the book that we were taught. It's Homer's Odyssey. It basically explains the journey of Odysseus all the way back to Ithaca to reunite with his family after a big war had happened. And when I was a student, I didn't really necessarily appreciate so much the teachings of Homer. We had so much of that to study and to read, and it just wasn't the most exciting for me back then. But having lived a little bit of more life, having been through, having more steps in my own journey, I've really come to kind of appreciate the importance of the journey and all the things that it teaches you. So now I'm really a proponent of just reading through and the Odyssey, and really kind of understanding what the teachings that it has to give us. This is actually a poem called Ithaca by a poet called Konstantinos Kavafis. It is inspired by the Odyssey and by the trip of Odysseus back home, but really emphasizes kind of the importance of the journey, right? That he had to go through all of these difficult things, of course, all of it in ancient Greek mythology. He had to overcome ancient mythological gods, going against him, like Poseidon, or weird mythological creatures kind of fighting him and his crew just to make it home. And all of these experiences are really what made the destination feel so valuable and so important. The fact that he was able to overcome all of that. So with that, this is the end of my presentation, but certainly not the end of the journey for me. And because I don't necessarily know where you are in your journey, maybe you're in front of a big crossroads, maybe you're well set on your way, but whatever that looks like for you, I just wish you good luck in your journeys, and I'm just really glad to be here to share a little bit of mine. With that, I'll hand it back to Megan, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much, Simoni. That was wonderful. And I really enjoyed, I'm like a big history geek, so the whole history of water and the Minoans and all that, I was just like, yes. Like this.
Yay! I'm so glad.
Yeah. So I just want to say real quick, please, everybody, if you feel comfortable coming on mic and asking questions, go ahead. This is very informal. Or you can ask in the chat, however you guys feel comfortable. We did have a couple questions that came in before the presentation. Let's see. So the first one, what advice, Moni, do you have for anyone looking for a career change into water quality? So I'm going to interpret that into as like just general career considerations or recommendations, training, kind of things of that nature.
Well, great question. What advice I would give for a career in water quality? I'm not sure, what the background of the person asking the question necessarily is, and their skill set or kind of specific interest in water quality, if it's specific to research, for example, which is what I do, or kind of more broad. But I would say for water quality in general, it's just such a cycle. And really, source water protection affects water quality. Drinking water treatment affects water quality. Drinking water distribution affects water quality. So my advice to folks considering, a career change that has some focus on water quality, whether that be research or otherwise, would really be to kind of understand the cycle and how everything really affects it. When I don't fully understand it entirely, I'm still learning myself. But when I was doing, the lead research work at Virginia Tech, I was really kind of impressed by how, a change in disinfectant in the community completely changed water corrosivity. A change that, a utility might be doing to improve disinfection byproduct, problems or other things actually caused an inadvertent problem elsewhere that hadn't been anticipated. That's generally something that's common, not just for corrosion issues. So, just having that holistic understanding and slowly learning about all of these aspects of water, I think would be very useful. And it's not, again, I don't have all the answers myself, and I've been at it for 2 decades now. But it's just good to keep that in mind and try to understand about all these different aspects and kind of influences.
Yeah, I definitely feel like water treatment can definitely get complicated really fast, especially when we're talking about corrosion control and like disinfection byproducts. It's definitely, having like a broad understanding of like what affects what, and there's a lot of things.
I know.
It's a lot of considerations. Yes, absolutely. Tony just got into it. He's made this question's deep. All right. The Odyssey highlights a struggle for identity too. Is this something you relate to, particularly in your journey for US citizenship?
Wow. But we're getting really heavy
It's
now.
profound. Yeah. I love it.
Tony, yeah, thank you so much. That's a hard one. A struggle for identity. I will say for the longest time, I kind of felt, and again, other folks might have a different experience. That's just mine, based on my background and my upbringing and all of that. Because I still have family back in Greece, and I'm very close to my family, and I love all of them very much. But for me, for the longest time, I genuinely did feel that I had one foot in this country and one foot in the other, and I was in this complete kind of confusion about where I really belonged. That's actually the reason why I was applying to professorship positions in the Europe. I actually had a faculty offer in the Netherlands, which was really prestigious. I also had a faculty offer in the US, which was also prestigious. And for the longest time, I just wasn't sure exactly where I belonged. I did choose the US, obviously, because I didn't pick the European faculty position, and I stayed at the EPA. But I go back to Greece as much as I can. And if you remember that roller coaster, you really do, after a while, this new world now is your world. And reverse culture shock, as I mentioned, is really a thing. But yeah, it's a great question for me, because I was so fortunate and I assimilated so well because there was so much support. Just the groups at Virginia Tech that were really there rooting for us to succeed. I don't think that kind of failure was an option, because everybody was so invested in our success and for international student success too, because I feel I was so lucky to receive all that support. Maybe that made kind of my assimilation and my feeling belonging here, kind of easier. But I don't think any of us forget our roots. We all kind of know where we came from, and we kind of let that guide us also, no matter what the journey brings for us. I'm not sure I answered, because I feel like I've been going in rounds trying to even think in my head. We might have to follow up with this with the person who asked, with Tony.
That's a pretty profound question. There's a lot to that question as well. I'm going to ask one. This is for my own, I guess, selfish reasons. So, as somebody who is entering maybe more of like a supervisor role, do you have any just like recommendations or thoughts like on the various teams you've been on? Like how did your supervisor or manager help motivate the team, or just kind of like do team building, or kind of like any like just experiences or recommendations for like building that team solidarity?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. So my disclaimer is I've never, formally held any supervisory position. I'm very happily a research engineer at the EPA, and very deliberately so. But, I've been part of teams. I remember at Virginia Tech, my research group actually had this kind of inverse pyramid philosophy. So the idea was that kind of the lower you are on the food chain, let's call it like that, you were receiving more support from others above you. So, everybody would go help undergraduate students. The research scientists would go help masters and PhD. So really the idea was to provide support and help for the people who needed it the most. And it worked remarkably well. There was an incredible amount of support for people, who were kind of younger in their path and who needed more mentoring and who needed more research skills and, more, I don't know, communication skills, more conference experiences or things like that. So that worked really well. But I think overall, respect and understanding and openness to meet people where they're at, and be open to hearing them out and really rooting for them, and supporting them in in their kind of in what they want to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the other thing I wanted to comment on was just like I don't think that people who were born in this country have a complete understanding of just how long that process is and all the visas. Like I get lost. That slide you showed with all the different kind of visas in your green card, like it's a lot. It's a lot. I'm just out of kind of curiosity, this is maybe a little off topic, but with kind of like navigating, that whole landscape, did you find there was like a lot of support for helping navigate that? Because I don't know that I would be able to, you know?
Yeah. So the reason I choose to show that slide, is that because, some folks might not necessarily know what it might entail, and it's just good to, to show that. I actually gave a separate presentation a couple of years ago. I wasn't sure if it would be appropriate to show that, like, should I stick to more technical matters? I ended up choosing to include it. And interestingly enough, Megan, out of everything else in my talk, that was the one thing that most people kind of gravitated toward and took their phones and started taking pictures as I was presenting. But yeah, it's fairly complicated. There are costs associated with visas. There are forms that have to be kind of completed, and there's time that has to pass for the processing. All of these things generally tend to change depending on rules that are not always the same. Yeah, it can be a little bit overwhelming. I will say I was actually a very I was lucky because, again, I was in a situation where I had the understanding, I had a higher level education. I could fill forms, I could understand forms, I could understand instructions. I could go online, search, maybe see if there were any groups of folks asking questions about this or that form. So I had that access. And I also had the ability, when it came time to apply for a green card, to hire a lawyer on my own and have that assistance. You know, I will say there were times when there were some challenges with the paperwork. And at those times, I don't know, I barely kind of navigated those, actually because of the visa challenges. My husband and myself were apart for a very long time. That's a whole other presentation. I didn't even go into that now. But I just, thinking of how privileged I am and how I was able to have that access and that assistance that perhaps some other people might not have. It just made me realize that generally, yeah, it can be a complicated journey for some people. And I'm one of the lucky ones that didn't particularly experience, too many difficulties with the process. But thank you so much for asking, and I really appreciate it. Yeah, I wouldn't expect you to know what all these visas are, and even all these acronyms and F1s and J1s and all of that stuff. So
Yeah, it definitely makes me think I should brush up it a little bit because every once in a while, I will get a question, from someone maybe considering an internship or considering a state job. And, I refer them mostly to HR because I'm like, unfortunately, I have no idea. I'd love to tell you I have the answers, but literally I've just got lost in the soup of which visa this, like, I have no idea. But yeah, so yes, I don't think that we have like as much of appreciation for how complicated that process can really be. So really just like that slide and you showing that.
But and on the other side, sorry, before we move on, just the ability to be able to apply and that pathway to exist and all these different types of visas to exist is a privilege in and of itself. And no matter how many difficulties, I'm just still grateful for the opportunity, right, to be able to follow those paths and to be able to become a resident and then a US citizen. So yes, with all the challenges that it involves, it's still an amazing thing.
Absolutely. Something people may not know about. So you mentioned like ORISE in your presentation, and I was a student services contractor. Do they still have student service contractors with USEPA? Is that still?
Yeah, great question. So that was with the University of Cincinnati, right?
I actually
Student
was
service.
in I was in Gulf Breeze with the
Oh,
toxicology lab. Yeah. Before I started with the agency. So it's been a while. It's been a
but
while.
that's super cool. So I've had the opportunity to collaborate with students at the University of Cincinnati through the trainship program, those things still exist. And ORI's, long story, long for a short answer, and ORI's opportunities still exist, and ORA opportunities still exist. So basically, these are ways for undergraduate students or folks with a master's or with a PhD to have the opportunity to be hosted at a federal government agency. It's not just EPA. ORI's and ORA, exist in a bunch of other federal government agencies, and they're really good opportunities. They're really good trainships. I had a really positive experience in mine, and for folks who want to explore it, I really recommend looking into it and seeing what opportunities are out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely follow up with anyone. I'm gonna put in the chat my email address, but if anyone is interested in that, I can find the page for that and send it to you. Because that was for me, I mean, that was such a good resume builder, and while I was getting my master's, like having that opportunity to be part of research with USEPA, and it was paid. So I mean, it was pretty great. But if you don't know that it exists, you can't apply for it. So it's one of those things that I'm like, hey, this exists.
Yeah. And they're also not very easy to find.
Yeah.
Like the announcements for these types of
Yeah.
positions go through a different website called Zintellect. So you really kind of need to know where to look and how to identify these positions. So it's definitely a good idea to, and maybe I can help, and share that general link for Zintellect. And if you filter all of those positions, then, if someone is interested at a position at the EPA or some other government agency, then you can apply different filters and see what's available.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm reading through the, sorry, Megan, I'm reading through the people's comments. Thank you so much to everyone who wrote something nice and who listened in. I really appreciate it. Maybe I can try to answer after we're done, but I'm just very grateful.
Absolutely. Well, with that, does anyone have any last minute questions? I think we had some really just good ones. All right, I just see a heart. Thanks, Tony. It was very good. I love that.
Yes, I reciprocate. Heart back.
Heart back. Heart back. All right, thank you so much. And then Simoni, if you want to just stick around after everyone leaves, we'll just like say goodbye real quick and thank you. But for everyone else, thank you so much for attending, and we'll see you in a couple months.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.